Frederic Remington, an American writer, sculptor, illustrator, and artist, was a true master of Western American art. His paintings capture the essence of the Western frontier during the late 19th century, featuring vivid scenes of cowboys, Native Americans, and the U.S. cavalry. Seth Pierpont Remington and Clara Bascom Sackrider welcomed Frederic Remington into the world in 1861 in Canton, New York. Remington's maternal family had deep roots in the hardware business and had emigrated from Alsace-Lorraine in the early 18th century. They were of French Basque descent and had settled in America in the early 1600s, founding Windsor, Connecticut. On his father's side, Remington's lineage traced back to England, with his ancestor arriving in America in 1637. His father, a Union Army colonel during the American Civil War, was also a newspaper editor and postmaster, while the family was known for its strong Republican ties and active involvement in local politics. The Remingtons were excellent writers, and Samuel Bascom, one of Frederick's great-grandfathers, was a talented saddle builder. The family has a military background that includes engagements in the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the French and Indian War. Remington was a relative of Eliphalet Remington, the man who established the oldest gun manufacturer in America, Remington Arms Company. He was also kin to three renowned mountain men, Jedediah Smith, Jonathan T. Warner, and Robert Doc Newell. Colonel Remington was away at war for most of the first 4 years of his son's life. After the war, he began serving as the editor of the Bloomington Republican, which caused him to temporarily move the family to Bloomington, Illinois. But in 1867, the family moved back to Canton. As the only child, Remington enjoyed constant attention and praise. He was a vigorous, large, and strong boy who delighted in hunting, swimming, riding, and camping. Despite his physical prowess, he struggled academically, especially with math, which clashed with his father's hopes for him to attend West Point. From a young age, he began drawing and sketching soldiers and cowboys. John Henry Niemeyer was Remington's teacher at Yale University's School of Art. In his first year, he was the only male student. He believed that traditional art training, such still life and cast drawing, was significantly less engaging than fighting and sports. Remington had a knack for action drawings, and his first published illustration was a cartoon of a bandaged football player for the student paper, Yale Current. Although he wasn't a standout player, his involvement with the strong Yale football team was a significant point of pride for both him and his family. In 1879, Remington left Yale to care for his ailing father, who was suffering from tuberculosis. His father passed away a year later at the age of 50, receiving notable respect from the people of Ogdensburg. Remington's Uncle Mart helped him secure a well-paying clerical job in Albany, New York, where Remington would return home on weekends to visit his girlfriend, Eva Catton. After Eva's father rejected his marriage proposal, Remington took a job as a reporter for his uncle's newspaper and moved on to several other short-term positions. Remington decided against going back to art school, content to live off of his inheritance and a little salary. Instead, he spent his time camping and enjoying himself. At 19, he took his first trip west to Montana with plans to either start a cattle operation or invest in mining. He quickly discovered, though, that he lacked the funds for either endeavor. In 1881, he witnessed the expansive prairies, dwindling bison herds, unfenced cattle, and the last major clashes between the U.S. cavalry and Native American tribes, scenes he had long envisioned. He even hunted grizzly bears with Montague Stevens in New Mexico in 1895. Although the hunt was more of an adventure than a serious endeavor, it gave Remington a more genuine glimpse of the West compared to later artists and writers like N.C. Wyeth and Zane Grey, who arrived when the mythic West was fading into history. Harper's Weekly published Remington's first commercial piece, a redrawn sketch on wrapping paper that he had shipped back east from his first trip. In 1883, Remington ventured to rural Kansas near the small community of Plum Grove south of Peabody to try his hand at the booming sheep ranching and wool trade. He invested his entire inheritance in hopes of quick profits as one of the so-called holiday stockmen, young Easterners looking to make a fast fortune in ranching. He found ranching to be a tough, monotonous, and isolated job that lacked the comforts he was accustomed to on the East Coast. The real ranchers considered him lazy, and by 1884 he sold off his land. Remington continued to draw, albeit his early work remained relatively crude and cartoonish. After less than a year in selling his ranch, he went back home. With additional funds from his mother, he tried to start a hardware business in Kansas City, but it fell through due to what he claimed was a swindle. He then invested what was left in a saloon as a silent half-owner. He went back home in 1884 to wed Eva Caten. Although he had previously been turned down by her father, who initially needed Eva's help as a widower, he was more receptive after remarrying. The young couple moved back to Kansas City right away. Eva was not happy with the saloon life and found Remington's sketches of saloon patrons unimpressive. When her husband's true occupation became known, she left him and went back to Ogdensburg. With his wife gone and business failing, Remington began to seriously focus on sketching and painting, trading his artwork for essentials. In 1886, Harper's Weekly sent Remington to Arizona as an artist correspondent to cover the government's campaign against Geronimo. Although he never managed to track down Geronimo, Remington gathered numerous authentic artifacts for future use and produced a wealth of photographs and sketches that would prove invaluable for his later paintings. In his notes, he also noted that horse shadows ought to be a cool carmine and blue to go with the black and white pictures. These really are the colors of the West. Ironically, art critics later dismissed his palette as primitive and unnatural, despite it being based on real observations. Harper's Weekly dispatched Remington to cover the Charleston earthquake of 1886 once he returned to the East. In an effort to expand his commission work, he started drawing graphics for Outing magazine as well. His first year as a commercial artist was quite prosperous, earning him $1,200, nearly 3 times the salary of a typical teacher. Remington had found his true calling and proudly told a friend, "That's a pretty good break for an ex-cowpuncher to come to New York with $30 and make it in art." Later that year, Remington landed a major commission to create 83 illustrations for Theodore Roosevelt's book, Ranch Life and the Hunting Trail. The book was set to be serialized in The Century magazine before its official release. At 29, Roosevelt had shared a similar Western adventure, having lost money on a ranch in North Dakota the previous year, but gained valuable experience that made him an expert on the frontier. This assignment gave Remington's career a significant boost and forged a lasting bond with Roosevelt. Remington's full-color oil painting, Return of the Blackfoot War Party, was showcased at the National Academy of Design. The New York Herald praised Remington, predicting he would one day be counted among America's great painters. Although not all critics were fans, his work was recognized as distinctive and modern. As seen by Mule Train Crossing the Sierras, 1888, he was skilled at creating intricate compositions and capturing activity from many viewpoints by this point. His status as a leading figure in Western art was further cemented in 1889 when he won a second-class medal at the Paris Exposition. Chosen by the American Committee to represent American painting, he was selected over Albert Bierstadt, whose grand landscapes populated with tiny figures of pioneers and Indians were now considered outdated. Around this time, Remington struck a gentleman's agreement with Harper's Weekly, giving the magazine an informal first option on his work while allowing him the freedom to sell elsewhere if he chose. In accordance with the agreement, the magazine began a significant advertising campaign for Remington with the tagline, "He draws what he knows, and he knows what he draws." Despite its numerous overstated claims, typical of the age, it was a successful campaign that catapulted Remington to the status of elite painters of the day, such as Howard Pyle and Charles Dana Gibson. Remington was shown as an authentic Indian scout and cowboy. In 1890, Remington held his first solo exhibition at the American Art Galleries, showcasing 21 paintings that were met with great acclaim. With victory all but assured, Remington cemented his position in the community. He became a well-liked social figure due to his extravagant character, his speech equal to that of a cowboy, and his Wild West image. His biography, while embellishing some of the myths he had encouraged about his Western adventures, contributed to his growing fame. Remington's rising fame made him a favorite among the Western Army officers involved in the final battles against Native Americans. He was invited out west to paint their portraits in the field, and to boost their national profile through his articles and illustrations for Harper's Weekly, particularly General Nelson Miles, an Indian fighter with presidential ambitions. Remington improved his standing as the soldier artist with the public by receiving unique access to the troops and their tales in exchange. One of his 1889 paintings shows 8 cavalrymen firing at Apaches from behind as they try to escape. The same year, another picture shows cavalrymen fighting an Arizona sandstorm. Remington described the harsh conditions, noting how the intense heat and swirling dust left the men feeling irritable and nearly comatose, with the fine alkali dust penetrating everything except their canteens. Remington arrived shortly after the 1890 massacre at Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where 150 Sioux, mostly women and children, were killed. He reported on the event as the Sioux outbreak in South Dakota, praising the Army's supposed heroism toward the Indians. Some of his paintings of General Miles are nearly monochromatic and possess a photographic quality that enhances their realism, as seen in The Parley, 1898. Remington portrays himself how he had always intended to be perceived in 1890's Self-Portrait on a Horse, not as a plump Easterner who struggled to manage his horse, but as a rugged, thin cowboy ready to go on an adventure with his beloved companion. His publishers also made an effort to cultivate this image. Remington's portrayal of a trapped bear on the prairie being subdued by hounds and riflemen in his last stand, 1890, may represent his thoughts on the predicament of the dying Indians he had seen. His attitude toward Native Americans was typical of his era. He saw them as mysterious, fearless, superstitious, ignorant, and merciless, often portraying them in this light. In contrast, white men under attack were shown as brave and noble. In the 1890s, Remington roamed across the United States, Mexico, and beyond, gathering inspiration for his articles and illustrations. Yet, it was his military and cowboy subjects that consistently captured the most attention, even as the Old West faded from the scene. He wrote A Cavalryman's Breakfast on the Plains in 1892. By 1895, Remington had journeyed south, and his illustrations and article on Florida crackers, those Southern cowboys, were featured in Harper's Magazine. Over time, he evolved from the foremost artist chronicling the Old West to its chief historian artist. He forged a successful partnership with Owen Wister, who was then the leading writer of Western tales. With growing confidence in his craft, Remington noted, "My drawings come entirely from memory now. I don't use a camera. The true essence is found not in the whole of nature but in its parts. What I leave out is as important as what I include." Remington remained focused on outdoor action, seldom portraying the gambling and dance hall scenes common in Western films, and avoided depicting frontier women. His painting A Miss Deal, 1897, stands out as one of the rare examples of indoor cowboy violence. In the twilight of his years, Remington settled in Ridgefield, Connecticut. During his last 2 years, influenced by the Ten, he leaned more toward Impressionism. He lamented being confined to his studio due to failing health, unable to join his peers who painted outdoors. On December 26, 1909, Remington passed away following an emergency appendectomy that led to peritonitis. His considerable weight, nearing 300 pounds, complicated both the anesthesia and the surgery, and chronic appendicitis was noted as a contributing factor in the autopsy. With the assistance of John Howard, an acquaintance of the Remingtons, and George Hall, an entrepreneur from Ogdensburg, New York, his wife Eva relocated to her hometown following his passing. Eva resided there with her sister Emma from 1915 until her own death in 1918. Eva oversaw the creation of Remington sculptures and his copyrights during this period. She also worked tirelessly to establish a lasting tribute to her husband, which came to fruition posthumously with the creation of the Remington Art Memorial in her Ogdensburg home in 1923, now known as the Frederic Remington Art Museum.